Hello, Taurus. Lately, I don't know if you felt this the way I once did. A shift so small that if you don't sit still for a moment, you might miss it. It's not anything explosive, not big news. Just the air around you feels a little lighter. I remember one morning, standing in my kitchen, making coffee the way I always do, and I realized I wasn't thinking about an old problem with the same tension as before. The issue was still there. The job was still the same. The person was still the same. But something inside felt different, softer, less sharp. When I think about Taurus, I often think about a very particular kind of endurance, the kind of person who doesn't quit easily, who doesn't sway at every gust of wind. There's something in that energy that feels like a large tree in a storm, not loud, not dramatic, or just standing there, season after season. But sometimes, that very steadiness can turn into a habit of carrying more than you need to. Like wearing a heavy backpack for so long, you forget what it feels like to walk with your shoulders relaxed and your spine straight. Maybe when the road suddenly feels lighter, it's not because someone cleared it for you. Maybe you simply loosened your grip a little. You let go of an expectation. You released a promise you made to yourself years ago. You softened the belief that you had to control everything just to feel safe. I once had a friend who's a Taurus, hardworking, deeply devoted. And during one stretch of her life, she told me, "I'm not tired because there's too much work. I'm tired because I keep thinking it has to be perfect." That stayed with me. A few months later, wow, she hadn't changed jobs. She hadn't moved cities. She hadn't done anything dramatic. She just started allowing herself to do enough instead of more. She began saying no to a few things that didn't really matter. From the outside, nothing looked different. But in the way she sat down, in the way she smiled, there was less strain. And maybe that's what I picture when I think about Taurus, in these moments when the path feels cleared. Not a miracle, not a grand turning point, just something inside coming into alignment. You may have spent months, maybe even years, holding onto a responsibility because you believed you had to. You may have held onto a relationship, a role, an image of yourself, because you didn't want to disappoint anyone. Taurus is deeply loyal. Oh, but sometimes that loyalty makes you forget to listen to your own voice. And then one day, you're sitting alone in your car, engine off, not quite ready to step out. You take a deep breath, and you realize you don't want to fight what you're feeling anymore. That moment isn't loud. No one applauds. But something shifts. It's like cleaning out an old room. At first, you think you're just dusting. Then you start folding clothes you haven't worn in years, throwing away papers that no longer mean anything. Each item you let go of doesn't make a dramatic sound, but the room grows wider. Maybe the energy around you now is like that. Not about adding something new, but about removing what no longer fits. Less stubborn attachment to one single way. Less self-blame over an old decision. Less comparison to someone moving faster. And when those things fall away, the road ahead doesn't feel so narrow. I don't believe every obstacle disappears. Life still bends. There are still days that don't go as planned. But when you're no longer fighting yourself inside, your steps feel steadier. Not because the ground is smoother, but because you're not carrying what doesn't belong to you anymore. If things feel even slightly lighter lately, maybe that's just a quiet sign that you've grown through a long cycle. No one needs to confirm it. No scoreboard required. Maybe you simply set the backpack down for a few minutes and realized your back is still strong. Taurus, you may not even notice it right away. You're not someone who celebrates loudly, but in that silence, there's a gentle kind of strength. And sometimes, being just a little kinder to yourself is enough for the road to open on its own. It feels wider, not because every obstacle disappears, but because you're no longer forcing yourself to push through them with tense shoulders and a clenched jaw. There are days when Taurus pauses, not to quit, but to admit something simple and human, that you are human, that you have limits, that endurance doesn't have to mean making life harder than it needs to be. I've noticed something about people who carry Taurus energy. They rarely recognize how far they've already come. They look at the road ahead more than the miles behind them. They measure their worth by what's unfinished instead of what they've already survived. And so the stones aren't just out on the path. They settle into the mind. And an old promise you made to yourself that you'd reach a certain milestone by a certain age. A quiet belief that if you rest, you'll fall behind. A sense of responsibility to family, to work, to the image others are used to seeing in you. Those beliefs may have made you stronger once, but over time, they can become armor that's too tight. And you keep wearing it because it feels familiar. Because somewhere inside, you're afraid that if you take it off, you'll look weaker. But the truth is, there are kinds of strength that don't need armor at all. There are evenings when Taurus sits alone, replaying decisions in their head. Maybe you wonder if you chose correctly. Maybe you regret how something unfolded. And instead of offering yourself grace, you pick up another stone. The strange thing is, almost no one sees those stones. Yeah, and they see you as steady, reliable, the one who's always in control. But inside, there are days you feel so tired, you just want to set everything down. And then one day, maybe quietly, maybe without anyone noticing, you decide you're not going to blame yourself anymore. No grand announcement, no dramatic shift. You simply stop replaying the old story. You stop asking what if. You stop demanding that you be better than yesterday in every possible way. That moment doesn't come with fireworks. It's more like opening a window after a long day indoors. Fresh air doesn't rush in violently. It just slips in gently. And suddenly, you realize you've been breathing shallow for a very long time. The stones that once felt permanent begin to lose their weight. Not because someone carried them away for you, but because you no longer agree to hold them. You may still work hard, still love deeply, still stand firm in what you believe. But that firmness feels different now. It's softer. It doesn't come from fear of failing or fear of being judged. It comes from a quieter place. And when Taurus walks from that place, each step has its own rhythm. No rushing, no comparing, no proving. There's a particular beauty in this stage. Not loud like a beginning, not dramatic like a major turning point. Just a quiet kind of maturity, like soil that's weathered many seasons and is finally steady enough to plant something new. No forcing, no pushing, just a growing sense that maybe you deserve to feel lighter. And maybe it's only when you stop carrying those old stones that you realize you were never weak. You were simply learning how to walk without adding extra weight to your own shoulders. And that may sound simple, but for Taurus, it's a deep shift. Because for a long time, you've told yourself you had to be strong. You had to stay steady. You had to keep your word. You had to see things through. You grip the steering wheel tightly when you're driving through heavy rain, as if loosening your hands even a little might cause everything to slide out of control. But slowly, you begin to notice. Holding on too tight can make you ache. The strength of Taurus isn't a wall. It's more like an old tree, roots deep in the ground, trunk upright. But even the strongest tree needs flexibility so it doesn't snap in strong wind. And sometimes the winds in life aren't there to knock you down. That they're there to remind you that you can bend and still stand. There's a kind of softness that's very quiet. It's when you hear feedback and don't rush to defend yourself. When you realize you were wrong about something, and instead of criticizing yourself, you just give a small nod inward. It's sitting with a cup of tea gone lukewarm, looking out the window, and accepting that not everything needs to be solved today. No one hands you a medal for that. No one sees how hard that moment really was. But inside, something begins to flow. I keep thinking about soil that's been loosened. The earth is firm and dense, but if it's never turned over, seeds struggle to grow. Taurus is fertile ground. Sometimes the only reason nothing new takes root is because you've packed yourself down too tightly. leaving no space for something fresh to enter. And when you allow yourself to try a different way, not reacting immediately, not clinging to a position just because you once chose it, you start to feel something surprising. You're not weaker, you're just less tense. Maybe before, you believed that if you weren't in control, everything would unravel. But when you slow your breath, let a conversation unfold naturally, give someone room to share their perspective, you realize you haven't lost your place. You've simply shifted from defense to listening. That softness doesn't erase who you are as a Taurus. It deepens it. Like someone who once insisted on walking only one road and one day notices a small side path nearby. Not to replace the original road, but to widen the view. And stepping onto that side path doesn't mean losing yourself. It means adding another possibility. There are nights when Taurus lies in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and wonders quietly, did I really need to be this tense all this time? That question isn't an accusation. It's a doorway. When you step through it, you're no longer bound to the image of always being the strong one. You allow yourself slower days, less productive days, days where you simply exist. And strangely enough, on those days, you hear yourself more clearly. Not the noise of expectations, not the pressure of comparison. Just a small whisper, I'm okay. When rigidity begins to soften, you don't lose your determination. You just use it differently. Determination stops being about fighting everything. It becomes the ability to choose what's worth holding and what can be released. And within that choice, the road ahead stops feeling like a battlefield. It becomes a journey. You still walk, you still work, you still set goals. But you walk with your shoulders a little looser, your gaze a little gentler, your heart a little less self-critical. Maybe that's the most beautiful part of Taurus learning to soften. Not because circumstances dramatically change, but because you trust yourself enough to stop bracing against the world. And when you're no longer bracing, you realize you were never weak. You were simply growing deeper. And when a person grows deeper, they don't grow louder. They don't need to speak more. It's simply the way they sit in a room that changes. And there's a stillness that's hard to explain, like the surface of a lake after the wind settles. The water doesn't try to reflect the sky. It just does. I think that's what inner alignment feels like for Taurus. There are seasons when you want one thing, but push yourself in another direction. You want to rest, but you keep taking on more work. You want to speak honestly, but you stay quiet to keep the peace. You want to change your pace, but you hold on to an old image because you're afraid of disappointing someone. No one sees that tension as clearly as you do. It's not dramatic. It doesn't make noise. It just quietly exhausts you. And then one day, maybe an ordinary day, you're sitting in your car after work, engine off, not quite stepping out yet, no special song playing, no cinematic moment. Just the realization that you don't want to brace yourself anymore. You don't make a big decision right then. You simply allow yourself to feel what you're feeling. No editing, no denying, no polishing it into something more acceptable. Taurus has a refined instinct. You may not say it out loud, but you always know when something no longer feels right. It's just that before, you might have endured a little longer because you believed you should. When alignment begins, it doesn't arrive like a loud bell. It's more like adjusting your posture after sitting for hours. Your back straightens, your shoulders drop. You haven't changed much externally, but your body feels different, more at ease. I once watched a Taurus shift in that quiet way. He still went to work every day, still took care of his family, still kept his familiar routines, but in the way he said no to a few unnecessary demands, there was a new calm. Not irritated, not defensive, just clear. And that clarity didn't come from winning an argument. It came from no longer arguing with himself. Maybe there was a time when you believed your value had to be proven by doing more, by never stepping back, by defending every belief against every opposing view. But as you grow deeper, you begin to sense that value isn't found in always being right. It's found in being able to listen without losing yourself. When your desires and your limits begin to agree with each other, you no longer feel like you're pulling a rope from both ends. You don't have to sacrifice your feelings to keep stability. You don't have to break everything just to feel free. You simply adjust, like turning the steering wheel slightly on a long highway. No one else notices that small correction, but the car moves straighter. And something interesting happens. When you're calmer inside, the friction outside feels less sharp. The circumstances may not change much, same people, same situations, but you're no longer reacting from a defensive place. You listen more. You speak a little less. You choose your battles instead of entering everyone. From the outside, it might not look remarkable, but you can feel that your heart doesn't race the same way in difficult conversations. You notice you're not lying awake all night because of one comment. Inner alignment doesn't make life perfect. It just makes you more honest with yourself. And when you live from that honesty, the road ahead no longer feels like something that has to be cleared through force or overexertion. It becomes a space where you walk, knowing you don't have to become someone else to be worthy. Taurus. This may not happen in a single day. It may come from months of quiet reflection, moments of disappointment, times when you've wondered where you fit inside all those expectations. But if you felt even a small sense of calm lately, even a subtle one, it may simply mean you're living a little closer to yourself. And when you live closer to yourself, the outer world doesn't need to shift very much for you to feel enough. And when that feeling of enough appears, even if it only flickers for a moment, it reveals something very gentle. Some of the weight you've been carrying was never forced on you. You carried it because you believed you had to. Taurus doesn't usually walk away halfway through. You tend to finish what you start, even when your heart is already tired. You keep your promises to others. And sometimes, you keep promises to an older version of yourself, the one who once believed you had something to prove. Maybe you told yourself you owed your family stability. You owed someone who loved you a more mature version of yourself. You owed your own past, an achievement that would justify all those years of effort. On the surface, those thoughts sound noble, but if you look closer, they can become threads wrapped tightly around your ankles. There are nights when the city lights are glowing outside and Taurus sits alone in a quiet room, thinking about past choices. There are things you wish you had done differently. The words you wish you had spoken sooner. Opportunities that slipped by because you hesitated or were too cautious. And so you hold on to this feeling that you need to make up for something. Do more, achieve more, correct the past by being harder on yourself now. But at some point, you may begin to see, not everything that lingers is a debt. Some experiences are simply part of the road. They arrive, leave their mark, and complete their role. You don't have to go back and fix every detail. You don't have to replay the past to prove you've learned. It's like an old room filled with objects. At first, you keep everything because it all seems meaningful. But when you truly begin to clear it out, you realize some things are just taking up space. They no longer serve the present. They only remind you of who you used to be. Taurus treasures memory. You don't discard easily. But honoring the past doesn't mean carrying all of it forward. When you stop punishing yourself for old decisions, the past doesn't disappear. It just loses its sharp edges. When you stop trying to repair something that already closed, you're not denying responsibility. You're simply acknowledging you've already walked that stretch of road. There's a relief that's hard to explain when you stop arguing with a story that has already ended. You don't need more evidence. You don't need another explanation. You don't need to work harder to make everything right. And when those so-called debts are no longer fueled by your thoughts, the obstacles ahead seem to lose some of their weight. Not because life suddenly becomes easy, but because you're no longer viewing every challenge through the lens of atonement. You walk not to make up for something, but to experience. You work not to prove, but to express. You love not to repair, but to share. The shift is quiet. No one else knows exactly what you set down. But in the way you breathe, in the rhythm of your steps along a familiar sidewalk, there's something subtly different. You're no longer walking with your head lowered under invisible weight. You stand straighter, not because you're forcing yourself to, but because nothing is pulling you down. And maybe in that moment, you realize something very simple. You don't owe life a perfect version of yourself. You only need to live honestly as the version you are now. When that thought lingers long enough, the road ahead stops feeling like a place where you must run to repay what you lack. It becomes a space where you walk in acceptance. And within that acceptance, there's a very gentle kind of freedom. It's not the kind of freedom where you walk away from everything, not the kind that comes from dramatic decisions or burning bridges. It's the freedom of no longer needing to prove that you're living the right way. You don't need someone else to confirm that you've tried hard enough, and you don't need to remind yourself to be stronger every single day. That kind of freedom feels like early morning, when the city hasn't fully woken up yet. The light isn't harsh, nothing is rushing. You step outside, take a long breath, and realize you're not in a hurry. Not because life suddenly became easier, but because inside, you're no longer racing. Taurus doesn't chase loud change. You love stability. You love what's familiar. But maybe the most beautiful kind of stability isn't when everything around you stands still. It's when you can stand in the middle of movement and still feel that you're not being swept away. When the road no longer has to be cleared through sheer force, you begin to notice the small things you once overlooked. Afternoon light slanting through a window, a simple meal that feels enough, a conversation that doesn't need to turn into a debate. You may still set goals, still dream, still want to move forward, but there's no longer that feeling that you're running to escape something behind you. You walk because you want to walk. Have you ever considered that the years you pushed yourself so hard may have been the very thing that taught you this gentleness? If you had never carried so much weight, maybe you wouldn't recognize how precious lightness feels. If you had never blamed yourself so many times, maybe you wouldn't understand the quiet power of forgiving yourself. And one day, you look back, not with regret, but with a soft smile. You realize you've traveled farther than you thought. No scoreboard required, no applause necessary, just you knowing. Everyone listening to this might find a different piece of themselves in these words. Maybe you're just beginning to set something down. Maybe you're still carrying a few stones in your backpack. Or maybe you've already been walking lighter without even noticing. If something here resonates, it may not be because it fits every situation, but because it touches a familiar place inside you. Sometimes we need spaces like this, slow spaces, where the story isn't trying to teach, only to sit beside you. And if you find yourself wanting to keep listening to reflections like this, you might choose to stay a little longer here. For now, maybe there's one gentle question you can carry with you. What could I set down today, so my steps feel easier to breathe in? And then, quietly, you keep walking, not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply enough to know you're living in a way that feels true to you.